Welcome to the NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden, taking a look at tonight's 8 game slates. Pretty good NBA slate here to kick off the week.
Yeah, it's not too terrible. Obviously, headlined by a massive amount of injuries, but there are some interesting storylines and things to follow. We might get the return of Kevin Love tonight, which will definitely be interesting. Unfortunately, the Cavaliers will be without their head coach for the foreseeable future. So, best wishes to Ty Lue. Hopefully, he's able to get his health issues under control.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the game that we're jumping into here first, Milwaukee and Cleveland. One of the higher totals on the night, isn't it? 224, Cleveland favored by 2.5. This is the final time they meet. They've met 3 times already this season. We get another battle of LeBron and Giannis, who have, elevated their games in this matchup in the past.
Yeah, they've elevated their games in this matchup, and they've elevated their games recently. LeBron freaking coming into this game, averaging a triple-double since February 7th. He's been outstanding recently. Giannis has been just insane over the past couple games, so it's going to be really fun to watch these two battle once again.
Yeah, we'll start with this Milwaukee side here. Obviously, you mentioned when you're looking at Giannis, like he's shown that upside again, coming off back-to-back really strong games. Given the fact that he's, averaged 30 real points against the Cavs this season. I don't mind going Giannis, especially on like DraftKings where, he is a little bit cheaper. I think he's about $1,000 cheaper over there. FanDuel, they're about the same price. Like, I feel like you're kind of splitting hairs if you're looking at LeBron and Giannis tonight.
Yeah, I think obviously LeBron offers probably the safer floor. Giannis potentially a little bit more upside, but I mean they're both excellent options. You're really split, like you said, splitting hairs. I think in tournaments I love Giannis on DraftKings more than I like LeBron, just because he comes in at a cheaper price. And I mean he's consecutive games, 30 points, 10 rebounds. Milwaukee's scored like 120 points in 30 of the last 4. So this offense is really clicking, and his usage rate recently has really climbed. It's over 33%, I believe, for the over the last 5 games. It's 34.2%. So great spot to start with Giannis here, and then the rest of this Milwaukee team is definitely interesting as well.
Yeah, like we see Middleton, I mean, shooting lights out from the field of late, like getting back to playing heavy minutes, seeing a pretty solid floor. Price tag is still pretty nice on Middleton. Like, I don't mind going back to the well. I know Cleveland obviously defensive efficiency wise, I know they look a little better in a couple spots, but I'm not necessarily seeing it.
Yeah, I'm not really either. And you mentioned he's been shooting really well. He's 10 of 17 from 3-point range over the last 4 games, averaging almost 25 points per game in that span. And Cleveland has really struggled against spot-up shooters. And Chris Middleton, 21% of his possessions are spot-ups this season. So I think this is an excellent spot for him. And I think he's going to be one of the less popular options from the Milwaukee side of this game. I also really like Eric Bledsoe, who's been playing really well over the last couple games. He has not necessarily been hurt by the signing of Brandon Jennings. Obviously, we know Jennings came in that first game and was outstanding, but Bledsoe over the last 31 minutes, 45, 40 fantasy points. And we know this is a defense that you can attack with point guards. So I think obviously Giannis, top play, Middleton and Bledsoe round out that top 3 for me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like Bledsoe. I like that price tag over on DraftKings. I mean, it's only 7,600. With the steals upside that you possibly have, it is a good matchup. Has played pretty well against Cleveland this season. I think he's cash game and GPP playable. Like, I don't mind going there.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a solid option in all formats.
You mentioned like Brandon Jennings. What do you think of these cheaper options? Do you like anyone here?
I don't mind Jabari Parker. I'm waiting for them to start to increase his minutes. It's kind of frustrating they haven't. But I don't necessarily mind targeting him as a cheap option to get exposure to Milwaukee. And John Henson's obviously an interesting option over on DraftKings at 5,300. I don't know if you're going to want to roll him out over on FanDuel at 6K, but he has been playing a little bit better recently, and his minutes have started to solidify. So I do kind of like John Henson on DraftKings.
Cleveland here, as we said, like you can look at LeBron here. Like obviously he's been tremendous. I mean, the minutes are going to be near 40 tonight. Triple-double potential, has played well against Milwaukee. Once again, no problem going back to the well. He's 13-1 on FanDuel.
Yeah, it's a tough price tag over on FanDuel. Obviously, in cash games, as we've mentioned several times on the podcast, like you're just locking him in and probably moving on. In tournaments, if you're wanting to go more balanced route, obviously you're probably not going to be able to fit him in. But he's a fine option if you want to roll him out. The rest of this team, though, like unfortunately, with news that Kevin Love might return, kind of throws a wrench in everyone else because we haven't been able to see how the Clarkson and the Hills and whatnot are going to perform with Kevin Love back out there on the floor.
Yeah, and it's obviously we have Larry Nance who's out for tonight's game. We have a couple of injuries too, like Kyle Korver, Rodney Hood are both questionable.
Hood is out.
Hood's out, so yeah, I mean we're looking at still some backcourt guys who should see viable time in this matchup. Nance being out, obviously if Love comes back, I think at his prices, like if the minutes are going to be there, like if he's going to play 20, 25 minutes, like he can easily pay off his price tags.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that you want to roll him out on DraftKings at 6,200. That's kind of a little bit of a steep price tag for a guy coming back from injury. But over on FanDuel, he's minimum salary. So if he's going to play like 25 minutes at like 3,500 against this Milwaukee team, you're definitely rolling him out there. Without Nance being there, and the potential return of Kevin Love, the rotation for like Jeff Green and Ante Zizic probably gets shortened. I would think that Green would be the guy they would rely on a little bit more heavily than Zizic. So Green probably still a solid option even if Kevin Love comes back.
Yep. If he doesn't sit, like I don't mind him, like given that his price really hasn't budged either.
Yeah, he's still someone that you can consider. And if Kevin Love does get ruled out, obviously Jeff Green pretty much a lock and load at his current price tag, especially in cash games. He'll be a popular option. And Zizic, you could definitely consider against this really bad Milwaukee interior defense if Kevin Love does sit.
Yep. You have any interest in the guards here? I know Corver's questionable, but George Hill, Jordan Clarkson. Corver's been pretty solid of late. I wish I stuck with him in that Phoenix game, but news kind of led me off.
Yeah, I think Corver's definitely a solid option. He's battling a foot injury, but if he's able to go, you would expect him to play a decent amount of minutes against a Milwaukee team that has really struggled at times to defend the three-point line. So that makes Korver very, very interesting. I still think Clarkson, especially over on DraftKings at 4,900, is still a viable option. What is he on FanDuel? He is 45. He's viable in cash. Don't necessarily see a ton of upside out of him. But I think he's a viable cash game option. And George Hill, you could roll out in GPPs.
Yep. Lakers and Pacers next game here, 218 total. Lakers playing pretty solid of late. Look at this Indiana team. Miles Turner's the only questionable guy on tonight's slate. Sabonis is out. We were talking a little about Al Jeff before the show. I guess we'll jump into the Indiana side. But Lakers side of things here, I don't mind some of these guys. I feel like some of them are going to be a little bit chalky, but I think obviously if we're starting off, like Julius Randle is basically the guy for me. But I'm not terribly excited about the Lakers.
Yeah, I'm not that intrigued by too many of the Lakers. Obviously, Randall, especially on FanDuel, at 7,400, very, very safe cash game option. He has a ton of upside in this matchup. Like Randall has just been so good recently. Obviously, he's playing a few less minutes at center with Brook Lopez being just outstanding. And that actually is probably going to help him in this matchup. Indiana 26th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against power forwards. Against centers, shockingly, they've been first over the last 10 games. I think some of that has to do with a good old big classic in the paint, feasting on all these young guys. But I do think Randall is a guy you're looking at, especially on FanDuel and cash games and tournaments. But excellent option there. Obviously, Kuzma still kind of battling an ankle injury, but he's 6K on DraftKings. What is his FanDuel price? 6,200. Assuming he's healthy and good to go, you would expect him to be back into the role of playing a bunch of minutes. It would be really, really tough to pass him up at that current price tag. So I think it starts with those two guys as far as the front court options goes for me.
Yeah, definitely. Like you mentioned, like Indiana's been solid against centers. I don't mind Brook Lopez like in GPPs. I think I'm gonna maybe be looking somewhere else as far as cash games go. And I'm still probably looking maybe elsewhere in GPPs, but can't deny his recent play. This is a spot overall in the season that we've attacked. Obviously, lately they've been a little bit better, but it won't stop me from using Lopez here. I don't have a ton of interest in like Ball tonight. Like you can use them, but I think KCP might be the guy that I look at instead if I'm really choosing a guard.
Yeah, I like KCP just as a guy who's going to be playing a bunch of minutes. Obviously, with this, with Kuzma back, we may not get the weird starting lineup with Isaiah Thomas at the 2 and KCP at the 3. Just kind of had to keep an eye on the news for that one. We'll obviously know ahead of time. But I do think KCP is obviously the top option just because you're getting so many minutes out of him. I know his performances have been a little bit down over the last couple games, but still playing a ton of minutes, and the matchup's not as terrible as people might believe. So starts with him. I don't mind Thomas and the Ball in tournaments, but I think I'm looking elsewhere in cash games out of those two guys.
Yeah, I just think it's a price point thing for me. Like if I'm getting KCP at like 1,500 less than Ball, like that's kind of where I like it.
Yeah, and like at 7,500, there's some interesting options at point guard for cash games at least that you can consider over Lonzo.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else here?
No.
Indiana side of things, obviously we're looking at this team. Miles Turner questionable. We've had some bonus out for a few games. We've seen Al Jeff, come alive here. Still fairly cheap. He's played 25 and 26 minutes over the last two games. Been really solid. I mean, at the double-double against Toronto, near double-double against Washington. I don't mind going back to the well here as long as Turner's out.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that you're considering if Turner is out. You could maybe see him still getting a decent amount of minutes if Turner is able to play just because Sabonis is going to be out. But at that price tag, I think you're kind of hoping for Miles Turner to sit. If Turner plays, I'm not going there tonight. I'd rather look elsewhere. But yeah, I think Al Jefferson is definitely in play if Turner sits, and if that happens, you might even be able to get some exposure to a cheap Trevor Booker over on DraftKings, but on FanDuel. He's definitely a fade because there's another guy that we're going to talk about that's a better option at that price tag.
Yeah. I don't mind this Indiana team. Like, once again, this game doesn't terribly jump out at me, but obviously Al Jefferson play for me. I'm intrigued with Darren Collison off the bench in GPPs. Obviously hasn't really shown a stable floor, but I think there's some upside here if he's going to get around 28 minutes. And I don't think he's going to be really all that popular either.
No, I don't think so either. He actually made it in my GPP article today. Obviously, it's a good matchup against a Lakers team that has struggled against point guards for the majority of the season. They're 23rd in fantasy points allowed, 21st in defensive efficiency against the position over the last 10 games. And as you mentioned, he's been coming off the bench. At some point, he's going to be back in the starting lineup. No clue exactly when that's going to happen, but he's a guy like the field goal attempts have been solid for him. 7, 11, 8, only 2 against Boston, but 10 against Atlanta. Had a really solid outing against the Raptors with 22 points, 4 assists, 2 rebounds. He had a 10 assist game against the Celtics, so kind of showing an all-around game. It just hasn't been in the same game whenever it's happened. And I think that happens tonight. And at 4,800 on DraftKings, really, really, really solid tournament option. He's even cash viable over on DraftKings. On FanDuel, 5,700, I think he's tournament viable only.
Yeah, I agree with you. Are you worried about Victor Oladipo here in the spot? Like, I feel like a lot of people are going to be looking and go, "Oh man, I could get some Oladipo exposure." But the Lakers have been really good against shooting guards of late. Like, I kind of worry about some KCP defense given his length. And Oladipo's just he's slowed down a little bit. Like the peripheral stats have kind of dropped. Shooting has been off a little bit here. But I don't know. I'm not willing to say Oladipo doesn't have any upside in this spot, but obviously he does. I just price tag wise, I don't know where he fits into my lineups tonight.
Definitely not going there in cash games, especially like on FanDuel. I'd rather like Tyreek Evans and Chris Middleton and some other guys that we'll get to later. I think he's tournament viable, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I don't know that I'm not going to chase the Lance Stevenson game. Like prior to him, torching the Wizards, like his production had been down, his minutes had been down. They basically just rode the hot hand in that outing. So I don't know that I'm going to chase that. Bogdanovich and Thaddeus Young are two cheap options to consider, but neither one of those guys is someone that I'm really like looking to build around.
Charlotte, Philly next here, 221 total. Philly favored by 8. We'll start with the Charlotte side of things here. Nicholas Batum out for tonight's game. Obviously, when that's happened, we usually seen Jeremy Lamb pick up majority of the run. I'm willing to fade Lamb in tournaments here tonight if he's going to be like 60%.
Yeah, obviously in tournaments at that ownership, you're probably considering a fade, but in cash games, especially like on DraftKings at 4,200, he's only 48 on FanDuel. He's pretty much a guy that is a core option. I hate saying the words lock. I don't like calling people locks because it's very subjective it's very situational, but in cash games, I think he's one of those guys that you're definitely building around.
Yeah, cash game is definitely fine. If Lamb was in a better spot, then I really wouldn't worry about the GPP ownership a ton. But there is just potential in this type of matchup where he kind of flops a little bit in like 20, 25 fantasy points. Yeah, fine in cash games, but won't be getting much done in GPPs.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, you do expect him to play a ton of minutes in the past, excluding the stretch where Batum was out at the very start of the season. I think he's only missed like two or three games, and Lamb has been like 33 and 35 minutes in those games. He's averaging like 31 minutes per game without Batum this season. So at that price, again, cash games for sure. If you want to use him in tournaments, feel free, but he is someone that if you're building a bunch of lineups, you probably want to fade in a few at least.
I don't mind using some Kemba Walker today, just given the fact that, one, he's, I guess, struggled a little bit of late. But overall, I mean, we just look like Charlotte's defense has been terribly bad. Obviously, Kemba Walker is going to be a guy who's going to be the number one offensive option, even though it's a bad spot on paper. I don't mind Kemba at his price. He's only 7,800 on FanDuel, 7,800 on DraftKings as well. Like, it's a pretty fair price for Kemba Walker.
Yeah, I really like him. I don't know that you're using him in cash games, but in tournaments, he's definitely a fine option. I do have a little bit of concern with the guys like Walker and Dwight Howard, who we'll talk about in just a second. Now that Charlotte is essentially eliminated from the playoffs, like they're not officially eliminated, but they're pretty darn close. It might be time for them to start getting an extended look at guys like Malik Monk, who hasn't really gotten a chance to play a ton this season. So that does have me a little concerned. So I would probably be off of Walker in cash, but he's definitely a tournament option that I would love to get some exposure to.
Yeah, it's kind of looked like the Charlotte team has given up here over the last maybe 2 weeks or so.
I mean, they got blown out by the Knicks, so
that sums it up, right?
Yeah.
I don't really have a ton of interest in Dwight Howard. I know he's been playing better of late. Has been okay against Philly this year. I just think I'm going to be heading in some other center directions.
Yeah, I will say, they don't have a ton of options at center, especially with Zeller doubtful for this game. We might get some extended run for like Hernan Gomez or something like that. So again, if you're wanting to build like some exposure to this game, and you're hoping that maybe they get some extended run to the young guys, Hernan Gomez and Malik Monk would be options, but Howard tournaments only. Again, not looking at any of these guys outside of Lamb and cash.
Anyone else?
No.
Philly side of things here. I'm going to start with Ben Simmons, who's been playing really well. Two triple doubles in his last 3 games. Almost had another one against Brooklyn. Going up against a Charlotte team that's just been dreadful on defensive late. I don't mind going with some Simmons. I don't mind going with Embiid even against Howard. But I really like the secondary guys too. Like Covington and Sarge are really interesting, just given that Charlotte's been god awful against forwards over the season and of late still. So like this Philly team is actually really intriguing to me.
Yeah, Robert Covington once again made it into my tournament article. I wish he was as cheap as he was the last time they played Charlotte, and he made it in my tournament article. And I promise I didn't just copy and paste what I wrote that time into this one. I actually rewrote. I wrote a whole new thing for it, but I still love Covington in the spot. Like talking about a guy who's been really solid recently, coming off a game where he hit a clutch 3-pointer to clinch the game against Brooklyn. He's like, I know he didn't play. He only played 24 minutes against Brooklyn, still shot really well, though, 80% from the floor. Before that game, though, over 30 fantasy points in 3 straight. His hot streak kind of started with the Charlotte game. Last time these teams played, they really struggled against spot-up shooters, really struggled against small forwards. So he's a guy that I absolutely love getting some tournament exposure to. You mentioned Saric. Excellent spot for him. His play has been kind of up and down recently. Obviously, we saw the big game against the Knicks, kind of struggled against the Pacers, played a few less minutes against the Nets in both outings, but I still think he's a very viable tournament option here. Maybe even cash viable if you think that Charlotte keeps this game close.
Yeah, and I think, like Sarge, like DraftKings 6,100. I do think he's cash viable for me. Like 7,200 on FanDuel, it's a little bit pricey. You have Randall, who's only 200 more. Yeah, I mean, like Sarge, like his play has been up and down. Still pretty solid. And I like the fact that actually Covington and Sarge both struggled against the Nets, because I'm assuming a lot of people used them and will be possibly hopping off in this spot, because I just think like Charlotte doesn't look great on paper as far as like what people look at. Like they're like, oh, Charlotte Philly, it's not that awesome of a game, but this is actually a really good spot for Philly.
Yeah, and like Charlotte over the last 10 games, their defensive efficiency has been terrible against centers 23rd, power forwards 30th, small forwards 15th, shooting guards 30th, point guards 28th. So a lot of great options from the Philly side of this game. You started off mentioning Ben Simmons and his 2 triple-doubles recently. I love Simmons here. He has a bunch of tournament upside, but he's just a really solid cash game option, I think, on both sides. I love the point guard, small forward eligibility over on DraftKings, but his ability to rack up peripherals, double-digit assists in 3 straight, just gives him a really solid floor and a really high ceiling. So I really like him. I think Simmons is my preferred cash game option, followed by Sarge, and then Covington and Embiid in tournaments for me.
Yeah, I like Embiid. Like he's just a tournament play. Obviously he's been very solid of late. He's been over 24 real points in his last 3 games, 3 straight double-doubles. Obviously had the big game against Charlotte the first time they met. Like I said, I don't mind in GPPs, but like we have like Jokic and Drummond and some other guys as well who are good spots.
Yeah, for sure. And even JJ Redick, solid cash game option at his price. Not a huge ceiling. I know he had a big game against the Nets. Not a huge ceiling, but he's 5K on FanDuel. Like that's like the nuts cash game option right there.
Yeah. Same thing as always. Like 20-25 fantasy points is probably what you're expecting. Anything more like that last game, good for you.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyone else?
You could sprinkle in some Ersan in tournaments. Not going to play a bunch of minutes, but when he comes in and is actually hot, gets hot from the floor like he does, get a few extra minutes, and he does have potential to put up a big game in this spot.
Denver, Miami next here, 216 total. Denver, fully healthy outside of Gary Harris. Miami's still dealing with Whiteside and Wade injuries. We'll start with this Gary Harris news. Obviously, a bummer. I'm sure you're grieving a little bit here with the loss of Harris for about a week.
I legit have not been able to recover. Like I was like, nobody talked to me whenever Gary Harris went down. I'm still. It hurts me a little bit that he's not able to go. I really hope he's okay, because 100% Gary Harris stand right here.
Well, it looked like he dodged a pretty major bullet. It looked pretty bad at first, and then things were okay.
Yeah, I almost started crying whenever I saw it happen. I was like, no.
Were you just ready to saw off your own leg and like mail it to him?
Take mine.
I like this game here tonight. I think it's intriguing, just given that Miami has, outside the Lakers game last time out, they really haven't been great defensively with the injuries to like Whiteside. We've seen against centers, they're bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed over the last 5 games. Jokic, I mean, over that span has been back to doing Jokic things. I'm intrigued. I still don't trust in cash. Like, I just feel like I still can't do it, but I like Jokic here.
Yeah, he made it as the first guy into my tournament article here. I think this is an absolutely amazing spot for Jokic, and I think it's a spot where nobody's really going to look at him, especially on DraftKings. Like, 8,800 is just insanely too cheap for a guy who's had 2 triple doubles over his last 4 games. He has double-digit rebounds in 3 of the last 4. 60, almost 70 fantasy points in one of those games. Like, this is just an amazing spot for Jokic. I know that's going to be kind of a pace down matchup, but without Whiteside there, they don't have anybody that can defend him. Like, good luck, Bam Adebayo and Kelly Olynyk. You guys are going to just get destroyed. 10K on FanDuel is really, really tough to stomach. But again, in tournaments, he's an amazing, amazing play tonight.
Yeah, he really is. I like going there. I don't mind Paul Millsap. Like, the minutes have been trending back upwards. He's played 30 minutes in each of the last 2 games. Fantasy production's been pretty blah, but this is a spot where I don't mind attacking him. I think Millsap's going to go overlooked as well.
Yeah, he's in a good spot as well, as you mentioned. Without Whiteside in there, they're giving the Heat are giving up more rebounds. That just boosts Millsap's floor. His ability to rack up the blocks and steals really, really helps. I think he's a solid cash game option, especially on DraftKings at 5,700. What is he over on FanDuel? 65. There's probably better options there, but if you want to get some tournament exposure, go for it.
And with Harris out, I mean, you don't have a ton changes. Like, we see Barton, like Barton's going to play a ton of minutes. We saw Devin Harris come in and play. I don't hate Harris, but like, he's just a punt option. There's nothing really to get excited about. Like, I don't think he's going to see a huge usage, obviously, on the floor, but I mean, he's probably going to get you around maybe 20 fantasy points.
Yeah, it's not really someone I'm looking at. There's just better value options on this slate.
Like, I'd rather attack Barton. Like, Barton's been coming off a couple of down games. Obviously hasn't really shot well. But like, his price tags are just really nice. Like, 6,600 on FanDuel. Like, he was just 76 like a week ago. Barton on DraftKings is only 6,300. Despite a pretty mediocre matchup on paper, like, I expect him to break out of a shooting funk at some point. I'm going to be on it.
Yeah, I will too. I think he's a solid option to really consider in all formats. Obviously, we know, Miami, a slow-paced team, pretty solid defensively, but those numbers haven't been great recently. I'm scrolling back up through my notes to find it. They are 18th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against shooting guards. I think he's a great way to get exposure to the Denver side of this game at a cheaper price in cash games and in tournaments.
Yep. Any interest in like Jamal Murray or Wilson Chandler, some of these other guys?
I don't necessarily mind Wilson Chandler. He's still a cheap option, still playing a decent amount of minutes. I don't know that I really want to go with Jamal Murray. I think there's just better options in that price range tonight.
Yeah, he's a little too expensive for me. 6,500 on DraftKings. He's 7K on FanDuel. We'll be looking elsewhere. I don't mind Wilson Chandler, especially on FanDuel. 5,200, like, he's still pretty cheap.
Yeah, I think if I'm looking at point guards, I'd rather have the guy on the other side of this game, which I assume we're going to get to next.
Yeah, let's jump in here. Dragic continuing to score really well. He's put up 63 real points over his last 2 games, had a decent game against Portland. He's not doing a ton of anything else. The peripheral stats have been down. Like, he's not racking up a ton of assists, but I guess when you kind of look at some of these other options, it makes sense sometimes.
Yeah, he's another guy that made it into my tournament article. Obviously, it's been really, really tough to trust him pretty much this entire season, but over the last couple games has been playing a little bit better, scoring better, shooting significantly better. And with Wade and Whiteside out the season, almost 31% usage rate, 1.13 fantasy points per minute. We know the matchup is outstanding against a Nuggets team, especially without Gary Harris, that has really struggled against point guards, and they really struggle against the pick and roll and against spot-up shooters, which accounts for a very large portion of Goran Dragic's scoring this season. So I think this is an excellent spot for him. DraftKings 7,300 and FanDuel 6,700, still a little too cheap for the upside he has here.
Yeah, it definitely does. And then once again, like, we're still dealing with some cheap Miami guys like that will fill in. Bam Adebayo, you mentioned, like, his price tag on FanDuel 3,600. But like even James Johnson, like 4,500 on FanDuel has been playing really well. Like these guys are just not moving in price, and it's not that bad of a matchup.
Yeah, like obviously DraftKings, it's a little bit of a different story with Bam Adebayo. He's 4,900, but on FanDuel, he's a free square. Like even though he's probably going to be really, really highly owned, he's 3,600. If he gets you 24, 26, 28 fantasy points, you're taking that all day long and cash in tournaments. So you can fade him if you want, but he's the free value piece that opens things up for you tonight. I don't mind James Johnson. I think I probably prefer Justice Winslow over Johnson in this spot. And then I think Kelly Olynyk is very, very interesting. I think they're going to need him to play a decent amount of minutes up against Jokic. Like I know Adebayo is going to play, 24, 28, maybe 30 minutes, but like I think Olynyk is going to be the better option, especially on DraftKings here tonight.
Yeah, I like Olynyk. Like he's been rather consistent. He's contributing across all categories. Usage rate's been pretty solid. Like that price is still really not all that. Like I'm not like, ooh, I'm paying that for Olynyk. Like I think he's just on the edge of like me paying enough for Olynyk. Like until he crosses into like the 6'3", 6'4" range, then I'll be off.
Yeah, and I mentioned, Denver really struggling against spot-up shooters. Olynyk, 22.4% of his possessions this season is coming off the spot-up. He's also really efficient in the pick and roll. Like it's not something that he does a ton, but he is pretty efficient in the pick and roll and in a couple of these other spots where Denver struggles to defend. So I really do like him in tournaments and cash games as well.
Any interest in like Tyler Johnson or Wayne Ellington? I don't know. Without Harris, like that actually downgrades their defense a little bit.
It does. I think pretty much all these guys are interesting. Like Johnson's really cheap. He's 5K over on DraftKings. He's eligible at both point guard and shooting guard. Over on FanDuel at 4,900, point guard only. I don't know that I'd go there. I think there's a few better options to look at, but he's someone that you definitely could consider. And even Josh Richardson is someone that you can consider in this spot.
Yeah, definitely don't mind it. I mean, came back. I didn't think he was going to play against that Lakers because usually that's what doubtful means. But came away, still played 32 minutes, put up 28 fantasy points. Didn't shoot well, but obviously, brought a lot else to the table. He had 8 rebounds, 4 steals. Richardson's, I wouldn't mind seeing Richardson kind of get back into that 30 to 35 fantasy point range where he was consistently before.
Yeah, I think he's probably a better play on DraftKings where he's cheaper. He's 5,200 over there. I think on FanDuel, I'd rather go with Justice Winslow if you're looking in that price price range.
Memphis and Brooklyn next year. Brooklyn fair by 5.5, 211 total. Look at this Memphis side. Andrew Harrison's the only questionable tag. Like this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen actually in a while for Memphis. Is a pretty clean injury report.
Yeah, I have to say, how bad does your season have to be underdogs to Brooklyn?
Hey, Brooklyn hasn't been that bad this year.
I get that, but like you're still underdogs to the Nets and like significant underdogs. Like 5 points is that's pretty bad.
You know what's great about Memphis is all these teams, Dallas taking some heat, Chicago taking some heat. Meanwhile, Memphis is just like playing the tanking game to absolute perfection.
Yeah, losing 19 straight games.
Yeah, and then like they'll casually rest, Gasol here and there, 5, 6 guys on the injury report that are actually injured. Like, well done, Memphis. Like, exceptionally well here.
Yeah, definitely. They're very interesting tonight, though. There's a lot of great options to consider from the Memphis side of this game. Like, I absolutely really, really like a lot of these guys.
Yeah, let's start with Tyreke Evans here, who's come back and really hasn't missed a beat. Minutes have been there. He's played 33 and 38 minutes against Denver and Chicago. He's put up over 40 fantasy points. Didn't shoot particularly well in either of those games, but still, I obviously like him here against Brooklyn. Like, I think the price is fair. He's cash GPP viable. He's probably one of my favorite pay-up shooting guard options. Probably actually the only pay-up shooting guard option maybe I like outside of Middleton.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think he's viable in all formats, has a pretty high ceiling given the matchup and especially the price, especially on DraftKings. He's 8K, and you can use him at point guard and shooting guard. FanDuel, he's 8K as well. 50 plus fantasy point upside in this matchup. I absolutely love him. And he's a great place to start with the Memphis side of this game. In addition to him, I think Dylan Brooks is interesting, coming off 24 points against Denver. He's been really solid recently. He's averaging 18 in his last 9 games on 45% shooting. 40% from 3-point range. We know Brooklyn has struggled against 3-point shooters at times this season. So I think he's definitely interesting, and that's pretty much my interest from the backcourt.
Yeah, same here. And when you look at the front court, like JaMychal Green, Jarrell Martin, been really playing pretty well. Jarrell Martin's been pretty impressive. I think more so for me here of late. He's a little bit cheaper than Green. You don't get a huge price difference like maybe you did a few days ago, but I think Martin's the guy that I have the most interest in from like him and Green, and then Gasol's viable as like a cash game guy.
I think Gasol has a ton of upside in this matchup. He's obviously the probably the best cash game center to consider from the nine of us. We know pretty much every center against Brooklyn Nets just goes bananas. He's coming off an okay game against Denver, 4-15 from the floor, had 35 fantasy points, kind of struggled to shoot. But against Chicago, we really saw the upside, 21 points, 8 assists, 10 rebounds, 50 fantasy points. Now that Tyreke Evans is back and Dylan Brooks is playing better, defenses aren't able to key on Gasol as much, and that's really going to help open things up for him. So he has plenty of upside at his price tag. He's 7,900 over on DraftKings. He's 85 on FanDuel. He has upside, so if you want to roll him out in tournaments, obviously he's a good play there, but definitely solid cash game option. And I agree with you. I think I like Jarrell Martin over JaMychal Green, and it's just a price play for me.
Yeah, that's all it is. Like, I have no issue with either. It's just I'll be looking to save maybe about $1,000. So
yeah.
Anyone else in Memphis you have any interest in?
No, not like Ben McLemore's minutes starting to go down now that Evans is back, and the rest of these guys just not interesting at all.
Yeah, what did McLemore play last game?
Like 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Yeah, I didn't even play against Denver. Man, what a rough life. You go out there, put your heart on your sleeve for the hapless, injured Memphis Grizzlies, and that's how you get treated.
To be fair, that's how he's been treated all his entire career.
Well, when you play with the Kings, that usually happens.
Yeah.
Brooklyn side of things here. I don't mind getting some Brooklyn exposure. It's kind of the same thing as always, though. Like, it's lengthy rotations. But I will start, I don't mind D'Angelo Russell has been playing pretty solid.
Yeah, he's been playing pretty well. At least 3 of the last 4 games, he did struggle against the Sixers. Shot 3 of 14 from the floor, but the 14 field goal attempts is definitely promising. He's been shooting a lot recently. Obviously, we know the minutes up and down. Against Toronto, when he was basically unstoppable, he played 35, but the rest of the games less than 30. Brooklyn does a lot of the riding the hot hand with the guards, with LeVert and Dinwiddie and Russell and Crabbe and Harris and their 900 other guards. So obviously you're assuming some risk with him, but at 6,900, I do like that price tag. And he's 69 on FanDuel as well, but he's shooting guard eligible there. So I think he's tournament viable. I think the entire backcourt is basically just tournament viable for me because, as I mentioned, they're going to do, you're getting short in rotations, you're getting, the hot hand scenario.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is. Like it's a struggle. It's helpful when one of these guys sit because when Crabbe sit, we kind of know some of these other guys are going to get stable minutes. But with everyone back and healthy, I feel like the slate's kind of big enough to not mess with it. Like in GPPs, you can go there if you're blowing a ton of laps and want to get some exposure. But I'm not too thrilled. I think if I'm taking someone, it's going to be Rondae Hollis-Jefferson and looking for his upside in this spot. I think him and Russell are the guys I have the most interest in. I'm not terribly intrigued with everyone else. That's about it.
I love Damari Carroll in this matchup. Memphis has really struggled against both the small forward and power forward positions over the last 10 games, 27th and 25th in defensive efficiency. Carroll is just a guy that can fill it up across the board. He has double-digit rebounds in 2 straight games. It's a matchup. He destroyed Memphis the last time they faced off, 24 points, 6 rebounds, 2 steals and a block. He's a guy, doesn't really matter who's in the starting lineup, what guard is hot, doesn't really affect him at all. He's just a great performer across the board. He is cheaper than Rondae Hollis-Jefferson on DraftKings. He's 5,500 compared to 64. So if you need the savings, I think you can definitely go that route. Over on FanDuel, it's Hollis Jefferson is 66, Carroll 62. Kind of just splitting hairs, so it comes down to which position you really have the need for. But I do really like Rondé Hollis Jefferson as well.
Anyone else here?
Nah.
Chicago and New York next game here. Knicks are favored by 5, 217 over under. Chris Dunn, Zach LaVine, Lauri Markkanen all ruled out for tonight's game. Noah Vonleh is questionable as well. So we're going to get a pretty dwindled down Chicago team. DraftKings, like their price tags are cheap. Like FanDuel, they got priced up. You mentioned to me before the show, like I hadn't seen FanDuel pricing yet, but some of these guys are a little bit site dependent.
I think that you're still considering him regardless of the site. Obviously, in cash games, Cameron Payne, solid option. This is gonna be a very, very chalky game. I think this is where most people are going to start with their lineup construction with the Bulls being incredibly shorthanded. Cameron Payne's going to play a bunch of minutes. He played 32 against Cleveland, 5 of 11 from the floor, 32 fantasy points, had 13 points, 10 assists. Kind of feels like his ceiling. I don't necessarily think you're going to get like more than that out of him, but at his current price tag across the industry, he's a solid cash game play. If you want to fade him in tournaments, feel free. Like I said, expect his ownership to be really high. Denzel Valentine, I don't care what his ownership is going to be like. He's just a guy that I'm building around. I was all over that play over the weekend, and he almost outdueled LeBron. Had a career game against the Cavaliers. Played almost 40 minutes, 58 fantasy points. He's a guy with Dunn and Markkanen and LaVine off the floor, 1.14 fantasy points per minute, almost 24% usage rate. Can fill it up across the board as well. I don't care what his ownership is going to be because he's a guy that I'm really interested in building around tonight. Yeah,
I like him a lot here. I think he's intriguing on both sides. Like the price tag, I know it's bounced up a little bit, but I'm okay with that. I'm a little bit bummed. I was kind of hoping like maybe Justin Holiday we get a cheap like 28, 29 minutes out of him, but I think he's just completely glossed over. Like he's bare min on FanDuel. He's 3,600, but even with these guys out, like it looks like he's only going to play 15 minutes, and because we even saw Jerry and Grant come in and play 16 minutes, who hadn't played in the last 5 games. So I'm bummed. I wish I could take a shot on Holiday, but I don't think I can.
For building like 150 lineups, you probably can get like 1 or 2 lineups with him at his price because it is a revenge game, and you do expect him to play, maybe 15, 17 minutes. So there's that. I think the other guard that is a little bit interesting is Antonio Blakeney, who has not really had like a huge outing yet, but he has shown upside. Like especially against Atlanta, teams that really struggle against point guards. We have seen 20 plus fantasy point upside, and he's pretty much minimum salary across the industry. He's a guy that you can consider in this matchup against a Knicks team that has really been bad against point guards this season.
Yeah, sure. Bobby Portis, another guy here. Obviously, there is some upside. Price tag is fairly high for him. But obviously the mids are where Noah's going to be pretty safe given that Lopez isn't playing a ton, Markkanen's out. So I'm okay with paying a 7K Portis, in this type of matchup.
Yeah, plenty of upside in a matchup like this. Obviously, with the guys we mentioned already ruled out, Portis 31% usage rate, 1.29 fantasy points per minute. So he just needs the minutes. We saw a solid performance out of him, 15 points, 15 rebounds against the Cavaliers. Double-digit rebounds in 2 of his last 4, double-digit scoring in 4 straight. It's an excellent spot for him. I think he's going to be the guy that really goes overlooked from the Chicago side of this game.
I'm not chasing the Felicio game here. I know he had a nice double-double in 30 minutes, but I'm still looking to pay up at center.
Yeah, I'm not going there with Felicio. I will say Vonleh is still a solid cash game option. Not a ton of upside, though.
No. Knicks side of things here, we've seen minutes kind of dwindle down for a lot of these guys. We're getting some more guys like Lance Thomas, and the guards continue to play a ton of minutes. But I will say I don't mind Tim Hardaway Jr. here. If you're playing, obviously, some Bulls, like I don't mind getting some exposure to Tim Hardaway and like GPPs because he's still shooting a ton. He does have some upside. He's at a reasonable price as well.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to pinpoint these Knicks guys right now because the rotation is just ridiculously weird. With Courtney Lee listed as questionable, if he's able to come back, that may eat into some of like Tim Hardaway Jr.'s minutes, could eat into someone else's. I think you're looking at Hardaway Jr. and tournaments, not someone that you can look at in cash. The rest of the guards like Trey Burke, Emmanuel Mudiay, Frank Ntilikina, I think Burke is the most interesting just because he's able to fill it up uh, pretty quickly. Like he's going to play limited minutes, but he is a high upside option at his current price. None of these guys are cash viable though. Like I think it's Burke and Ntilikina and then Mudiay as far as tournaments goes.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, you can't trust any of these guys in cash games. The minutes are just too unstable. Any issues in the front court, like Michael Beasley. Like, Beasley went off. I mean, we haven't really seen much out of him. Like, he went off against Philly. I don't know. He's another one where just minutes, like, if he's playing well, I guess they ride with him. But the same thing kind of goes with the rest of these guys.
On FanDuel, Beasley in tournaments is fine. On DraftKings, he's fade for me. The rest of the guys, like Enes Kanter, kind of came out and was like, "We don't need to be trying to lose. We need to be trying to win." And these guys, if they want to develop, they can develop in the G League. And basically, since he has said that, he has seen his minutes trend down. So if you want to get some exposure in tournaments, it's a solid matchup. I think Kyle O'Quinn is probably the better option. He's been playing pretty well recently, playing still limited minutes, but he's not a guy that needs a ton of minutes to put up a solid game. So he's interesting. Isaiah Hicks got more minutes against the Hornets. It was a blowout. He played 25 minutes though, but he's 3,300, so you can sprinkle him in tournaments. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like you're basically just sprinkling these front court guys in tournaments, and that's it.
Yeah, and I will say Kyle Quinn's pretty interesting, especially, well, I mean, not especially, but on FanDuel, like his defensive numbers have been through the roof. Like if he's racking up, a combined 3, 4, 5 blocks plus steals, like, that's 15 fantasy points right there. And obviously he's rebounding really well and should rebound really well tonight.
Yeah, it's just kind of tough to use him at
a only center.
Yeah, but like he's one of the cheaper options there, and there's not a whole lot to like down, at that price tag, except for maybe Al Jefferson if Turner is out.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on here. Golden State and San Antonio. What could have been an excellent game has kind of turned into a pretty ugly one.
Yeah, I'm going to take like a 10-minute break while you read off the injury report, and I'll be back.
Let's run through here. It's Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, Omri Caspi, all listed as out. I will say Patrick McCaw is probable tonight. Kevin Looney, Zaza Pachulia, Iguodala, Quinn Cook, all probable. Looking at these, I guess let's talk about Quinn Cook because he's just been through the roof. Like he's played 40 minutes in the last 2 games. I know that's been without McCaw, obviously in much better matchups than the one tonight, but like Spurs have kind of been horrible against point guards of late. And if Quinn Cook is going to play 40 minutes, like I don't hate it, but I wanted to go off and kind of just go somewhere else.
I'm willing to go elsewhere in tournaments and cash games. It's probably Cook and Cameron Payne that you're basically building around as value, like point guard options. Cook has been outstanding in the last couple of games. He's without the stars on the floor. His per 36 numbers like 20.2 points and 4.3 assists. Obviously, you would like those assist numbers to go up, but he's not necessarily a true point guard. He is a really solid scorer, though, as we've seen with the last couple of games. Not a great matchup, but as you mentioned, the Spurs 27th in defensive efficiency against point guards over the last 10 games, without Kawhi and whatnot. Like defense is kind of taking a step back, so he has upside. So even using him in tournaments at his price tag, you can still do that. Obviously, again, he's probably going to be chalky. So if you want to go another direction, feel free. But he's still a guy you're pretty much, you can't really fade him cash because the 40 minutes, like you can't fade that.
Oh, like on DraftKings, he's 4,500, like 52 on FanDuel. Like I get fading there just because it's a little higher price, but I'm not dying to really get exposure to this game like at all. Like Draymond Green's priced up incredibly high. He's 8,500 on FanDuel. He's 9,600 on DraftKings. Like, yeah, sure, he could have a solid game, but I don't think it's going to be 9,700 worth.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's averaging like 45 fantasy points per game against the Spurs this season. Obviously had a huge game against them last time out. 11 points, 10 rebounds, 12 assists, or 10 assists, 12 rebounds. Rebounding upside is there. The assist numbers, obviously, you would think that they would plummet without Curry and Clay and Durant on the floor, but they've still been solid. I mean, he's averaging, 1.24 fantasy points per minute without those guys this season. I mean, I still think he's cash viable and all on both sites. Tournaments, you're probably looking elsewhere at his price tag on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, like that's still a pretty solid price tag for tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like he's obviously played well against the Spurs this season. He's played well of late. I guess I just see when I kind of look at like lineup building approach, like I'm going to be probably looking at more maybe like a Ben Simmons instead. I might be looking kind of at some other like just slightly cheaper guys like a Julius Randle.
Yeah, it's definitely site specific. I think for tournaments like on DraftKings, I mean Giannis is 800 more, and I can use him at the same position. So obviously that decision's pretty easy. And again, on DraftKings, LaMarcus Aldridge is significantly cheaper, and I can use him at the same position. I'd rather go that route. So, like I said, you're locking in a guy with a safe role in cash games, and on FanDuel tournaments, you can consider him if you want. I think he's a better tournament option on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings.
Yeah, it's definitely nothing to do with Green's ability to rack up points tonight. It's just other guys' prices is kind of where I factor in. And once again, like this game, I'm just not dying to get a ton of exposure. It's the lowest, total on the slate. With everyone out, it's not really that fun as far as these games really haven't been that great fantasy wise. And so when you even take out those stars, like you expect it to be fun.
Yeah, it's basically been Aldridge and Green are the only ones that have been solid for in these games anyways. And they're pretty much the only guys that are left on those teams.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at like the rest of these guys, I don't have a ton of interest. Like Kevin Looney, like out of nowhere, has played pretty well the last few games, but I don't feel the need to kind of go and chase some of these options like that are going to get maybe 20, 25 minutes. And even like an Andre Iguodala, like, I just don't love these guys here.
Yeah, not terribly high on them. Like if you're wanting to get some exposure to them, feel free. Like you mentioned Looney, he's one of the cheaper options. You can go there if you really, really want to, and if you need the value. I don't know that I expect, 24, 27 fantasy points. Obviously he did that against the Lakers and the Suns. Significantly better matchup there. But he's a guy that you can definitely consider. Definitely not looking at Nick Young. Like I know he's playing a bunch of minutes, but
I'm 5K for Nick Young. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm not going there tonight. Like tournament, sure. Cash, no.
Yeah, no thanks. Anyone else here that I glossed over?
No, not really. Like, no.
Spurs side of things here, Kawhi Leonard still ruled out for tonight's game. Like you said, like I'm willing to go with Aldridge here. Kind of a monster game against Minnesota. I think we see him put up a very solid game tonight. He's another one he's a little bit site specific. Like I like the 84 price tag. I don't like the 92 price tag on FanDuel. Like I'd rather go with like a Ben Simmons at a similar price or just drop down to Green or Randle.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I mean, obviously we saw him put up a huge game against the Warriors last time they faced off. He had 57 fantasy points, 37 points, 17 rebounds. Like the Spurs are in a battle for the playoffs. Like they're at significant risk of missing the playoffs. They need to win this game, and they need Aldridge to really step up for them to do that. So I expect him to play a bunch of minutes. I expect him to be heavily involved in the offense, and this is a spot like the Warriors have struggled against big men this season. So I think it's an excellent spot to get exposure if you want to. I definitely wouldn't say no to using him.
I want Devontae Murray to get 30-plus minutes, and that would kind of solidify my love for him. But he doesn't. I like him in tournaments still, though. Like I feel like he's going to be kind of overlooked, and I think this is a potential where he can rack up fantasy points, but he just doesn't get over the 30-minute mark, which makes him tough to trust because he doesn't do it. If he doesn't do it in like the 25, 28 minutes, like obviously he's not going to get it done.
Yeah, I think he's tournament viable. Obviously, without the stars, it does help him a little bit. You can roll him out. I think Kyle Anderson is very very interesting. Has just absolutely crushed the Warriors in these previous matchups. Coming off 14 minutes against Minnesota, that's a little concerning. But 34 against the Pelicans in the prior game, like his minutes very very volatile. But when he's on, and he's putting up big games whenever he gets hot. So I do kind of like him in tournaments as well.
Pau Gasol's such a troll. Him and Pop. I think I played him like the last three matches before the Minnesota game, and then obviously the Minnesota game he goes off.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not going there tonight. Like the Warriors can still go small, and that's gonna mean like Aldrich at the 5, and Gasol's just not gonna see minutes. Like I wouldn't be shocked to see Popovich roll out the small lineup of what is it, Murray, Mills, Green at small
Yeah.
forward, and then Anderson at power forward tonight. So Gasol again, tournaments if you're dying to get exposure there, but I don't really think he's someone that you want to look at.
Oh, yeah, I was just bringing them up. I wasn't really looking at him. Like, I don't really have a ton of interest in the rest of the Spurs here. Like you mentioned Anderson, I think that's kind of where it stops for me. I don't really have any interest in the guards on this slate just because there are other guards with higher upside.
I will say Green has been solid recently. And that's
So
pretty
St.
much.
Patty's Day, that's why it's over now.
Well, I mean, Orlando and New Orleans too.
I sure, yeah, sure. I don't know. I hate Danny Green.
I mean, so do I, but like, who's he going to be guarding? Like, he's going to be guarded by Kevon Looney and Andre Iguodala and Sean Livingston and Patrick McCaw.
That's true. But I don't know. I'm just ready for like the 12 fantasy point game if I roster him.
Yeah, he's tournaments only, that's for sure.
Yeah. Do you have any interest in anyone else?
No.
Detroit and Sacramento. This is probably the first slate in a while where we don't have really enticing like West Coast games to kind of stack at the end.
You mean this is not a fantasy gold mine here?
I don't really like it all that much. Detroit's been awful of late. Sacramento's been awful for last few years.
Hey, Sacramento's playing really well recently. They beat the Warriors.
They've. I'm not even gonna get into it. Detroit here, like I like Drummond. I like the upside. Obviously, against this Kings team, we've started to see better upside games out of him of late, scoring a little bit more of late. Still, obviously, not getting assist numbers. I think those are well and gone. But with the potential for peripheral stats here, and obviously a double double, I like Drummond in this spot.
Yeah. What is he coming off? 22 rebounds against Portland, 17 against Denver, solid scoring outings in both those, 50 fantasy points in back-to-back games. We know Sacramento really bad against centers. So, yeah, he's someone that you can look at in all formats. I think on FanDuel, especially I think at like center, it's Embiid, Drummond, and Jokic all over 10K. I think I'm going Jokic in tournaments, Drummond and cash out of that group. And then if you're going cheaper, it's Gasol. But I do really like Drummond on DraftKings at 8,900.
Yeah, nice price tag here. I wouldn't mind Griffin, I think, on a different slate. Like, I think he's still viable. Like, he has flashed some upside. I think the price tag is reasonable. He's kind of like Draymond, like where I think I just kind of might go some other directions for a little bit cheaper or maybe even a little bit more with higher upside.
Yeah, I prefer Drummond at a similar price point on DraftKings. I prefer several other guys as well. If you want to get some tournament exposure, feel free, but he's a very volatile option.
Yeah, and like outside of that, like I don't have a ton of interest. Like Reggie Bullock's been a little bit better of late. But I just don't want to pay over 5K for him.
Yeah, he's the guy I think that I'm most interested in, strictly because we know the Kings really struggle against spot-up shooters. They've struggled against wings this season, so I think he's the guy that I have the most interest in. I mean, he's still only 5,200. He's playing a decent amount of minutes, double-digit field goal attempts in at least, 10 straight games. Those shots are starting to fall. He's going to be able to put up a solid outing here, so I think he's the guy that I do have the most interest in out of the rest of these Pistons. I'm not touching the point guards. Like if you want to get some Dwight Bikes as a tournament option on like DraftKings, go for it. But I'm not touching the rest of these point guard options.
No, I'm not either. And like I know Luke Kennard's been playing pretty well, but I'm not once again, not intrigued.
Yeah, I'm not either.
That's pretty much it from Detroit. Let's look at the Sacramento side here.
Yeah, because it gets so much better on that
I
side.
know. I don't really have a lot of interest. Like Buddy Hield's been excellent of late. He's 6,400 on FanDuel. He's 59. Like, sure, like in GPPs, like I can give it a look there, but outside of that, like I'm not terribly intrigued with the Kings side.
He's been better of excellent. Like he's been really freaking good recently, like 40 plus fantasy points and 3 straight over 20 real points. Rebounding has been up, assists have been up, shooting outstanding. Like if you want to roll him out, I think his tournaments only, because we know he has like an 8-point floor, but he also has like a 40 plus fantasy point ceiling. So it's a good spot. You kind of just ride the hot streak here if you want to. Outside of him, yeah. I mean, Detroit has struggled against point guards recently, 24th in defensive efficiency. Fox has been okay, not great, but he also has a really low floor like we saw against the Warriors. So tournaments doesn't really have a bunch of upside though, so I don't really think you want that. Bogdanovich, cash game.
No
viable.
one's forcing you to say anything about the Kings here.
I'm trying. I don't want people to be like, oh, well, no one's, what do you don't like this guy from the Kings? Because and then he comes out and puts up like 30 plus fantasy points. So, I mean, yeah, it's tough. These Kings are terrible.
Yeah, I don't like you said with Fox, like the funny, like you want to like Fox here in the spot because it is a good matchup, and you kind of look and go, oh, he's relatively safe in cash games, and then you kind of look and go, oh shit, he's had 3 single-digit fantasy point outings in like his last 10, and I don't mind him for the price. Like usually it's weird because usually I don't mind Fox in GPP or in cash games because like he's only going to hover around like 25-30 fantasy points and not much more. But yeah, with the recent play, with the Kings kind of rolling in some other directions, like we've seen Frank Mason come in and play like over 20 minutes and kind of take away from Fox a little bit. We've seen Bogdanovich and obviously Hield kind of take the usage and shine away from Fox really over the last few weeks.
Yeah, and it's kind of just made it one of those situations where he's too volatile for cash, but doesn't really have a ton of upside for tournaments. So it's one of those things where he just kind of gets overlooked. So I don't know. I don't know that I want to touch that situation. Again, it's pretty much just Hield in tournaments. And then I don't mind the front court. Like Scalavissiere is still really cheap, especially on DraftKings. Willie Cauley-Stein, I think, has a ton of tournament upside in this spot against a Pistons team, 21st in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games. Like, I think he's a very, very, very good tournament center option here.
Yeah, especially at that DK price tag, only 5,600.
Yeah, and I mean, he hasn't had a ton of upside recently, like against Utah and Golden State. Utah, obviously, a tough matchup. Golden State wasn't terrible. I mean, 9 points, 6 rebounds, only played 26 minutes. Like, not a terrible game there, but like 5,600, I think he's someone that you can definitely expect a solid game out of. Yeah,
I agree with you there. No one else from Sacramento, so let's wrap it up here. Let's go most steals tonight.
Eric Bledsoe.
I will say Victor Oladipo. But yeah.
I like it.
That's it for us. You can enter DaveFantasyCafe.com. You can check out Brent's GPP article for tonight's slate, cheat sheets, optimizer, everything there. And good luck, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Good luck.